Hey guys, it's Steve from Featherlight Studio Sessions, the show about all things audio, except this week. Winter is finally over here in the Great Northwest, and we are outside packing up and headed down to play the Outdoor Summer Concert Series in beautiful Sun River, Oregon. And being outside and shooting video got us really thinking about how big a part of audio production it's become. So specifically, showing some much needed love to this guy, our trusty Canon 70D. Man, it's been an incredible workhorse, super dependable tool, but definitely not a 4K camera. So how do you squeeze as much possible image and resolution out of that thing as you can and compete with those crazy 4K images? Maybe even fake a little bit of 4K? We thought it'd be cool to show you some tricks that we've discovered that makes that job a little easier. Stay tuned.
All right, guys. First, we love our Canon 70D. It's been an insanely dependable and powerful tool, but it is definitely not a 4K camera. So how do we compete with that? Well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to a website. We're going to head on over to HitFilm.com. So for those of you that use After Effects or Final Cut Pro or Premiere or any of those programs, this is going to look very familiar to you. It's incredibly powerful. It has some of the most cutting-edge effects available in any software today, with one gigantic exception. It is completely free. Let me say that again. It's not kind of, there's no gotchas, no subscriptions. It's completely free. Go up to the menu bar here, come down to HitFilm Express, click on the link, download your key, and get started. You will not find a better deal on the planet. We've got some great tutorials, some amazing stuff on here. It has an incredibly active forum and community. And Josh and Kirsty and Axel and all the guys over there, they're super helpful, super knowledgeable, and it's completely free. Check it out. So we've got it ready to go. HitFilm was installed, and this is the basic interface that we see when we start it up. So we basically have two kinds of completely different editors stuck in one piece of software, which is so incredibly cool because bouncing back and forth is seamless. So we have a regular timeline editor, which almost every one of you probably are super familiar with, like in Final Cut Pro and Premiere and iMovie and all that stuff. And then we have our compositor editor, which is built right into the interface with all of these insane effects to choose from and use on the fly. So what we have here is some basic footage loaded up from our 70D. This is just a regular street shot showing the detail of the camera. So let's move in to 100% so you can get an idea of what we're talking about. This was shot in the CineStyle profile, which is downloadable for the 70 and 80D. It's a little flatter and lower contrast than the regular camera profiles, but it allows us to do some stuff in post that we can't do any other way. All right, so this is pretty average in what we can expect. It's a decent image, and it does give us some room to move. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to come up to all these effects here, and these effects are just drag and drop. So a basic color grading starting point for all of these, realistically, we've got all the basic tools you could need and some really, really great ones that you won't find in any other editor, actually. But let's start with some really basic controls here. So here's our movie down here. We're going to start with a pretty standard color grading choice, which is crust black and whites. And this is really just going to allow us to recover some of the shadows and take some of those down a bit and add a little bit of contrast and achieve a decent graded look compared to our original. The other one we're actually going to use is a kind of diffuse. And what this does is helps flatten the image a little bit. We'll bring the radius down a little bit. So in its extreme form, it makes kind of a soft focus, but we don't want a soft focus. What we really want is just a really subtle version of what we have here. And what that's going to do is to help give us the appearance of finer detail by flattening the colors and the contrast out a little bit. So these are not really unusual starting points for a grade. This would be a pretty standard grade, and then you would add a little bit of sharpening to it So we'll come down here to our effects and we'll grab sharpen, and we're going to put this at the very beginning of the chain. And as it turns out, the order these are in are really important. Having the sharpening go first and then all of the effects operating on that sharpened image is really super important. We're going to keep sharpening pretty low. And the very first thing you'll discover is that the sharpening in this program is light years better than the one in the camera by a mile. So now when we zoom in and we take a look at this at 100%, we've really gained quite a bit of detail back that we didn't have before. So let's look at the before and after pictures of both of these guys. So here's our basic ungraded image right out of the CineStyle profile. And there's our basic graded image with it. All right, so that's pretty standard stuff. Not a lot really going on there for a basic grade. Most people would start there. We're going to do something a little bit different that's going to help us kind of compete with that 4K image. And you can create presets from any of the combinations of effects you use here. So for example, we have these 3 effects. If we right click, we can literally just create a preset and put it wherever we want. All right, so we've done that. And we're going to go down to our preset window down here at the bottom and expand it. And then we've got a couple of presets that we've made here. So let's go through what makes these different and gives us what I'm going to call our fake 4K image. And you can already see this is a pretty spectacular difference between the two. So here is our ungraded image complete. And here's our finished product. All right, so you wonder, that's a pretty impressive feat for a Canon 70D that clearly doesn't have the ability to resolve that kind of detail, especially when you really look into these areas, the fine lines, the wires, the overhead wires. So by having these effects in this particular order, we kind of fake 4K basically. And how we're doing that is by the use of these 2 independent effects and where they are. So in a regular grade, we wouldn't probably use this much sharpening because it would fall apart pretty quickly. And grain. Grain is really the secret weapon here. Now, mostly grain is used to give a film effect. And so if you looked at this and we used the standard preset for grain, you'd see a lot more grain. Like it would look like more like that. And while that's an interesting special effect for a film, it's not very useful for us because we're not trying to create grain. What we want instead is to keep this down around 4. And the reason why is this. When grain aligns itself with these wires, every time a piece of grain bumps up against one of those lines or bumps up against a hard edge over here or a needle over here, what it actually does is trick your eye into thinking that it's seeing more detail than it is because it draws your eye's attention to those detail areas. And that's what's giving us the impression, like these pine trees and these distant wires in the background, that we're actually seeing more detail than we really are. It's because the grain is actually tricking your eye into thinking that it's seeing more detail by using it. If we bump it up to the point where you can actually see it visibly, then we've gone too far and we lose the effect. So by the use of these 2 in conjunction, grain following the chain and sharpening beginning the chain, we sharpen the image up to the point where it might be a little bit too much, for example, without the use of grain. But because they kind of work in tandem together, they allow each one to help our eye draw the attention to detail. It's a little bit like using psychoacoustic effects in audio, for example, when we're using phase-based effects or modulation-based effects to achieve the impression of stereo width, or mid-side processing, for example, to do something that tricks our ear into thinking that we're hearing something or hearing more of something in terms of depth or widening. This is very much the same approach. By using sharpening, for example, and grain in conjunction with one another, we can achieve a really spectacular result from a camera that was never designed to produce that kind of detail, or certainly at least to record that kind of detail, without having to hack the OS and do the magic lantern thing, which adds some great functionality to it, but isn't stable on the 70 or 80D series cameras. So there you have it. There's our secret recipe for fake 4K on a 70D. If you guys learned something or if you like what you saw, please remember to hit the sub button. And I'd love to hear any more suggestions that you guys have about tricks and things you use to get the most out of the older gear that you have. One real quick side note, the effect grain here is one of the very few effects that doesn't come complete with all of the stock HitFilm Express platform. It's one of the few add-on packs that I bought. I think it was like $10. It's an insanely killer deal. There's a handful of add-on packs that you can buy there on their site, and they're super affordable, and they add a ton more functionality to it. It literally is the deal of a lifetime, and you can't get a better deal anywhere. I promise you this. All right. Thanks for hanging out. Till next time, this is Steve from Featherlight Studio Sessions, and we'll see you next week.